where it all comes as well as the Israeli Defense Forces have extended their operation in Rafah in the south of the Gaza Strip to include southeastern as well as eastern parts of the city. Hundreds of thousands of people are also streaming north and west to what Israel is calling expanded humanitarian zones. Well, we're going to talk about the latest with our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons now. Rob, the fighting in Rafah, I mean, it shows no sign of letting up. What seems to be Israel's goals here?
Well, it's a good question. And it's one that the United States, among others, is asking itself, because it's not entirely clear what they're trying to do. The Israelis say it's the complete defeat of Hamas. But, the US, again, is asking, what do you mean by that precisely? And is that even possible? Again, the US has been putting immense pressure on Israel not to launch a full-scale offensive against Rafah. It's paused, for instance, the supply of bombs, 900-kilogram bombs and others. It's warned the Israelis that if they do launch a full-scale offensive, that other weapons will be denied them as well. And the response, though, has been quite stubborn from Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, we will launch a ground offensive, full-scale ground offensive. We will defeat Hamas in Rafah because it's vital for what we're trying to achieve in Gaza. But it has to be said that for all the bluster that we've been hearing from Netanyahu and others, on the ground, they're not really doing that much. There hasn't been a full-scale ground offensive. There have been attacks against Rafah, but it's more like salami tactics. And in a nod to the Americans, they've been attempting to evacuate civilians from the areas that have been going into. They've set up what they're calling humanitarian zones, extended humanitarian zones. One at a place called Al-Wamasi on the coast, which extends as far as Khan Yunis, big city that was leveled by Israeli bombs during the recent offensive there. The question is, though, on the ground, what does an extended humanitarian zone amount to? And aid agencies have been saying, effectively, not very much. At a time when there's fighting which has prevented aid coming in through the Rafah crossing into Egypt and through Kerem Shalom nearby, the amount of aid that's getting into Gaza has dropped drastically. So that the famine that people have been talking about in the north of Gaza is now spreading down into the south. And it means that these extended humanitarian zones do not have anything to offer to the people who are streaming in their direction at the moment, hundreds and thousands of people. So the situation is pretty grim.
That's the situation in the south. We've also got fighting erupting once again in the north. This is months, of course, after Israel claimed to have defeated Hamas there. What does that tell us?
I think the point is the one that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been making, that, you can go into Rafah, for instance, and militarily defeat Hamas for a few weeks or so, and then they pop up again later. It's the question is, what does defeat really mean? He said again, the same Antony Blinken this week, that look at the north of Gaza, and you see the case in point that he has been making, that 4 months after Israel announced that it had dismantled Hamas, to use its word, dismantle is its own word, dismantled the Hamas command structures in the north. Here we are again, heavy fighting in the Jabalia refugee camp, which was the nub of the fighting 4 months ago. And 100,000 people are on the road again, trying to escape the fighting yet again. Israeli forces taking heavy casualties in the north, and Hamas showing no sign of being defeated in any meaningful sense. Which brings us round again to the question, which again the United States and others have been putting to Israel. You've got to start thinking about what comes after the conflict in Gaza. What are you going to put in place? What intentions do you have? And so far, the Americans haven't been getting satisfactory answers from the Israelis, largely because it seems the Israeli government hasn't given an awful lot of thought to it itself. It's been talking about the possibility of an Israeli military administration. Most people believe that that's not going to cut it.
Let's end, Rob, by talking about the emotional day today. We saw at the beginning that report of Palestinians already marking Nakba. Yesterday, for Israelis, was Independence Day. Both sides kind of even more of a heightened emotional moment for them.
Yeah, I mean, for Israelis, perhaps not in present circumstances, but a joyful memory of the foundation of the State of Israel in 1948. But for Palestinians, one day after the Israelis, it's the Nakba, as they call it in Arabic, the catastrophe, which recalls the time in 1948 when the Israelis forced them out of their homes, having forced back Arab forces which attacked Israel just after it was formed. 700,000 people had to flee. The Israelis have not given them the right of return. And those 700,000 people are now 6 million descendants of the original refugees who are scattered across the Arab world, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria, in the West Bank, and of course in Gaza. 1.5 million people living in Gaza are direct descendants of that original 700,000 people. And now in Gaza, 75% of the population is in turn having to flee homes, evacuate homes. And the question they're asking themselves is this another Nakba? Are we going to be forced out of Gaza? And they could be forgiven for thinking that, first of all, because how long is it going to take to rebuild their homes? The UN reckons it'll be 2040 before they're rebuilt. But in addition to that, there are many in the Israeli government who are talking quite openly about the need to resettle Gaza with Israeli settlers and to encourage the people of Gaza to leave. Just this last weekend, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, was at a rally for settlers in which he was making exactly that point. He said, we should encourage the immigration. We are coming home. So if you're living in Gaza and you're hearing senior ministers in the Israeli government saying that, of course you're very nervous.
Rob, thanks very much. Rob Parsons, our chief foreign editor here on France 24. As Rob mentioned, many of those Palestinians going to Jordan. And in fact, in about an hour and a half's time here on The World Today, we're going to bring you a special report on that in Revisited. So that's coming up for you in about an hour and a half's time. Stay with us for that.